Coming up in This Week in Computer Hardware, GTX 1080, we has a preview. Doom is coming, and so are the driver updates. Kaby Lake, Ubiquiti, going consumer, seamless roaming, and more. It's all coming up next on Twitch.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twitch.
Bandwidth for Twitch is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 363, recorded May 12, 2016. GTX 1080 preview and Doom.
This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by iFixit, introducing the all-new ProTech Toolkit to give you the compact and complete toolkit for all things DIY. For $5 off your purchase of $10 or more, go to ifixit.com/twit and enter the code TWICH at checkout. And by Braintree. Mobile app development can be complex, but integrating your payments no longer has to be. With Braintree, your business can accept nearly every type of payment from any device with just one integration. Learn more at braintreepayments.com/twitch.
Welcome to Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware. Twitch's weekly show that aims to bring you the most useful, most informative, most engaging, most delightful. And you know what? I think we just stop right there. Just not even get to the news, the reviews, the commentary, the discussions of builds. I think we should just stop the show right now. The perfect 45-second show. What do you say, Ryan?
I was wondering if you meant stop the intro or actually can't end the show now. And I'm okay either way. I mean, really, if we've made our case, I think people understand what our opinions and views are at this point, and there's no need to talk about any more hardware. What other hardware could there ever be?
Oh my goodness. Well, for example, this. Inside of this box is the Wallabot. And you may be thinking, what is a Wallabot? And that is a perfectly good question. A Wallabot is this. And while that may look like a cell phone cover or some sort of a RFID canceling wallet, it's actually an RFID visualizing device that has 18 antennas inside of it and uses those to see through things like concrete. Yes, I could target you through concrete, Ryan. Isn't that exciting?
Does it also go through 2,000 miles?
Sadly, as of this date, the distance is limited by I think it's running from like 3,000 to 10,000 hertz. Little high for a 2,000-mile transmission because of the whole curvature of the planet going through the surface of the Earth problem. We'll get into that another day. You got your I would say my grubby little paws, but your incredibly talented and sophisticated benchmarking fingers on the GTX 1080. And you have a video preview. Is the GTX 1080 all that? Is it the most amazing board ever? Did it make you weep with joy and realize that you can now stop reviewing GPUs because there will never be a I can't even say there will never be a faster GPU with a straight face.
I can't say any of that because we're not allowed to talk about like the actual performance numbers or anything yet, other than what Nvidia talked about at their kind of launch and announcement event. So we have ours here. This has been completely benchmarked and power consumption tested and all that type of stuff. So it's ready to go. We have to wait until next week to really talk about the specifics. But they kind of did like a live stream and announced a significant amount of information about the product itself, including the pricing, the availability, the kind of expected performance, I guess. So we're talking about the GeForce GTX 1080, GeForce GTX 1070, NVIDIA's next generation GeForce products. These are based on the Pascal architecture, which is a 14-nanometer FinFET process technology that these GPUs are built on, right? And that process node jump turns out to be very, very significant, right? If you think we've been on 28 nanometer for a very long time on the GPU side, we kind of skipped over 20 and went straight to 14, 16, right? So AMD and NVIDIA both kind of stuck on 28 for a long time, and now we're moving up. And because of that, the increase in efficiency, the increase in performance you can get, apparently, is more than you would have expected, I think, because you're essentially double jumping across the landmine or the field of landmines that is computer performance. They talked about, let's see, what I gotta get my numbers right here. So I'm saying the numbers I'm allowed to say. So I'm going to reference the story that we wrote up on PC Per. It's rated at the GTX 1080, which is like the higher end option. 9 teraflops compute, 8 gigabytes of memory, GDDR5X, G5X memory. So it's a new memory interface, 256 bits, but you're still getting like 320 gigabytes per second of memory bandwidth. So plenty of memory bandwidth there. Available on May 27th. The GTX 1070, the next step down, you know, you're talking about your 980 to 970 jump. This is the 1080 to 1070. 6.5 teraflops, 8 gigs of memory, but GDDR5, not G5X. 379 MSRP, June 10th availability. Now, it's also, before we get into the pricing discussion, because that's going to be interesting, the other specs that they listed for the GTX 1080, it's 2,560 CUDA cores, so a significant increase there. But not only that, but the base clock on these are 1,607 megahertz with a boost clock of 1,733. So the GTX 980, I think, was a base clock of 1,060 or so, with a boost clock. Yeah, with a boost clock of around 1,200 maybe, or like 1,180, something along those lines. So we're talking about a huge increase in clock speed here. And this is only using one 8-pin power connector that you can see right here, and it draws 180 watts. That's actually up from the GTX 980 that had a 165 watt TDP. This is 180, but it's significantly less than the 980 Ti that was rated at 250 watts TDP. In terms of performance, what they talked about in terms of performance is that the 1080 will be faster than a Titan X, which essentially means faster than a 980 Ti. And they used some terms. They said twice as fast and 3 times as efficient. And those are not wholly accurate numbers, so I don't feel like reporting those is probably in the best interest. But I'll say what they said, which is what I just told you. It is not 2x the performance of a Titan X in terms of all of your games. It's 2x the performance in like VR stuff potentially because of some new features they've integrated. But like in terms of, will Battlefield 4 or Rise of the Tomb Raider be twice as fast on a 1080 as it is on a Titan X? The answer is no to that. But you know, they've talked about it in terms of availability, May 27th. The reviews will be up before that. And it looks pretty impressive. And in terms of design and everything, like for this card, it looks exactly like all the rumors and images we saw, kind of a polygonal, tessellated, faceted design, but very similar in look and style to the GTX 980, 980 Ti cooler, 780 coolers. It's got a back plate on it. Display outputs, you're still talking 3 display ports, 1 HDMI and 1 dual link DVI, so you still get all that there. Get a little window in there so you can see the heat sink. There's no lights or anything on the inside, but so you can see the heatsink, and then the GeForce GTX logo up top is illuminated as well. 2 SLI connectors. Yeah, I mean that's what you're looking at. It's impressive clock speeds. They don't have clock speed information about the 1070 yet, so we don't have like a relative performance necessarily. But it was surprising how much they announced, I guess, up front.
Right. They just won't let you talk about the stuff everybody actually cares about, which is the performance.
Correct. Not yet. I will tell you by this time next week, we will be able to discuss those specific metrics, right? And I'm sure we will in great detail. Now, pricing wise, the MSRP of the GTX 1080, they started at $599, but they list something called a Founders Edition. It starts at $699. So at $599, that is $50 more than the GTX 980 launched at, but $50 less than the GTX 980 Ti launched at. So just kind of keep that in your mind as you go through the discussion, and knowing that the 1080 is going to be faster than the 980 Ti by some healthy percentage. You know, it seems like a fairly good deal at $599. Now, the Founders Edition at $699 has become a point of contention amongst the enthusiasts out there, the media, and Nvidia. So as far as we know, and this is we've pretty much figured it all out at this point. This is the Founders Edition. They have renamed the idea of a reference card to a Founders Edition card. Okay. You know, here my take on it is.
I was wondering when they were going to do that.
Like, reference sounds dirty. It doesn't. It sounds cheap. It sounds run of the mill. It sounds low quality, right? Here's the reference design, and then everybody else got design.
I'll buy the rest of that. I don't know where you got dirty from, but I'll buy the rest of that concept.
Fair enough. With the first term, I was struggling to figure out what direction I was going in. So by changing it to Founders Edition, they create a little bit more cachet around it, right? Like, they build pretty good coolers themselves, right? They use high quality parts. They do a good job on board design, and they want it to be seen as a high value product. Now the problem is, well, okay, so this does two things. Like, so these are the cards that ship first, right? Mm-hmm. And as far as I can tell, based on talking to all the AIBs that I know, like EVGA and ASUS and all those guys, these are the cards that will be available on May 27th. They'll be ASUS branded, or they'll be EVGA branded or MSI branded or whatever, but it will be this design, this cooler that will be available, which means it will be $699. So if the card is available day one at $699, but they have kind of said that the MSRP will be starting at $599, like, how does that, you know, affect our outlook on performance per dollar, on how we review it, how we rate it against the competition, right? Because based on my talks, like, the board partners will have products out lower than $699, approaching $599. Nobody will commit to $599 yet. But in every instance in the past, the reference card has been the lowest price card, and everybody else has gone up a little bit from there. Now, another way to look at this is that NVIDIA wants to, like, they want the early adopters who they know will pay extra for this stuff. They're going to go ahead and grab $100 from them while they can. But NVIDIA has said that this Founders Edition card will exist throughout the lifetime of the product, and they don't, you know, they don't foresee the price ever really dropping on it. And their take is that we are creating this product at this price point and giving the $100 room below it space for their partners to create their own product and add their own value, right? So they claim to be giving room to their partners to kind of show what they can do, either on a budget area or in terms of, you know, matching the same price and do more impressive cooling. The other the opposite way to look at it is, okay, NVIDIA is just like, they know that they can get an extra $100 out of people, so they're going to do it for as long as they can. You know, foreseeing that the first batches will just immediately sell through, and that they'll make an extra profit margin along the way. And that's honestly the secondary option I just mentioned is probably the truth. I don't know yet how availability and yield on these parts is going to be. So capitalism says you charge what everybody will pay for the product. And so if they sell out immediately for the first month at $699, then it's going to stay there. And you'll see board partners struggle to justify selling a product for $599 if they know that the product is selling at $699. Well, which sucks, right? For gamers, knowing, and it also kind of pisses me off just from the fact that NVIDIA got up on stage and said, look, it's $599. And then we had to explain to everybody, it's like, actually, when you first get it, it's going to be $699. And then, you know, it's up to you. It's up to the other people from that point to determine if it actually hits $599. So that is a frustrating kind of turn of events, despite how impressive everything else came off as like during the live stream. So it will impact our take on the product, I think, to some degree, right? Like, I can't review it as a $599 product. I have to review it as a $699 product. So,
however, should this price drop in the none too distant future,
right?
That just sounds messy and complicated and unnecessary. I mean, I also understand a company wanting to make more money.
Yep.
I don't know. I'm going to reserve my truly cantankerous response to when it actually ships and we have the final pricing. How about that? It seems
that seems fair.
Unusually reasonable for me. It was interesting. I saw the article and I was like, what? The 1080 SL, the 1080 the GTX 1080 SLI is limited to 2 cards. And so the post was deleted. It was originally from Chris Benchevenia, the support manager at EVGA. Now they're basically saying more information on SLI support will be coming soon. Please stay tuned. But the idea was that 1080 cards only support up to 2-way SLI, and anything above this will not work. And my first thought was like, oh, 1080p, 1080, GTX 1080s. Who's going to want more than 2 cards running 1080p? And then after a while, my brain finally turned on after the second or third cup of coffee this morning. I realized that they were talking about next generation of cards supporting no more than 2 GTX 1080s in SLI. So there would be no triple or quadruple SLI. And part of me, I'm kind of back and forth about this. First of all, the number of people running triple or quadruple SLI is probably, in the high hundreds. Certainly the low thousands. It's complicated engineering. It requires a lot of bandwidth. It probably requires a metric ton of testing. And I would bet around 95% of the people doing SLI are doing it in dual card arrangements. That seem reasonable?
That seems reasonable. We were having a discussion yesterday about if you had to guess of the percentage of people that have GeForce cards in the 900 series from like 960 and above. So like 960, 970, 980, 980 Ti, Titan X. For every person that owns in that ecosystem, what percentage would you think have multiple graphics cards at all? And my guess was 2%. I don't know. I don't have any numbers to base this on.
That sounds about right. I mean,
that's 1 in every 50 people that that has a GeForce card would have multiple GeForce cards, right? And so you think, okay, so it's 2% to go 2-way SLI. Now you're talking 3 and 4-way, way less than that, right? So subset of that. And I think you're probably right. Like 95% of the people who are doing SLI are probably doing 2-card SLI or Crossfire for that matter. So I see how NVIDIA could justify making this change if it happens to be true. Not everybody's going to like it, right? And I'm also kind of curious how they would react to, there is some cachet about having the world's fastest benchmarking records, right? And when people do that, they're running 4 cards for whatever crazy reason. So would they just say, you know what, we don't really care about that anymore. We're not interested in world records and LN2 overclocking and all that type of stuff, and just leave that for AMD, or would they make special cases for it? It would be. I'm going to ask them now, obviously, since this information started to come out. But it's interesting to think how that would change. But I imagine like the QA for multiple GPU going to 3 GPUs and 4 GPUs is pretty expensive, pretty difficult based on the number of people that use it. So,
it certainly seems it's probably a prudent cost-cutting gesture.
Yeah.
I don't know. It is interesting to contemplate. We got to take a moment to thank our sponsor, iFixit.com. I love iFixit. I loved iFixit before they were our sponsor. They are amazing, not just because they have an incredible inventory of replacement parts and tools, not because of their lifetime warranty, but what really makes iFixit amazing is the 19,000 free step-by-step repair guides. You don't have to buy their tools. You don't have to buy their parts. You can access at iFixit.com 19,000, probably a lot more than that by now, free step-by-step repair guides if you want to fix your stuff and make it last longer. Today, ladies and gentlemen, the all-new ProTech Toolkit. There's one on the bench right behind me. It is gorgeous. They basically took their ProTech Toolkit and made it easier and better to use. Probably the best part is the new 64-bit driver kit. That's another 12 drivers over the 54-bit driver kit in the old version. They put it in a nicer case. It's magnetically held onto the tool roll. You can actually lift the lid off. It's magnetic. It makes it, there's no like grabbing it and pulling it out from under the strap and holding the hinge down or the latch down and opening it up. It's like you whip open the tool case, you drop the cap off, you can drop your screws into the lid, and you have access to all the bits. More bits. We're talking about fewer repair roadblocks. A really nice new precision driver. I like it a lot more than the last one. It's a little shorter, it's a little fatter, makes it easier to turn. A flex extension for hard to reach screws. If you ever have trouble getting around the edge of a case to that one motherboard screw in the back, you need the flex extension that is on the 64-bit driver kit in the ProTech toolkit. ESD-safe tweezers, including a pair of reverse tweezers, a bunch of plastic opening tools, spudgers, and picks to help you get your tablets and smartphones open. Speaking of smartphones, they've got their suction cup in there for display assembly removal, a metal spudger, iFixit's own rubber-handled Jimmy pry tool, which makes it really easy to get into those super tight plastic cases without tearing stuff up. And if you're feeling old school, they got a ESD safety strap to make sure you don't destroy your job with static shock. Best of all, backed by iFixit's lifetime warranty. Buy it because it's awesome, or don't. You still get free access to all the free repair resources on iFixit.com. Do us a favor. Do yourself a favor. Grab an all-new ProTech toolkit and get going on your next fix, hacks, or build. Head over to iFixit.com/twit. That's iFixit.com/TWIT and use the code TWICH TWiCH at checkout to save $5 on your purchase of $10 or more. And we want to thank iFixit for their support of This Week in Computer Hardware.
Indeed.
Yeah, it's right here. What's that?
Indeed.
Right here, man. Right here. It's always within reach. I'm just saying. Radeon is excited about Doom, which is coming out tomorrow. I understand that you've made arrangements and brought an external sitting to preserve your marriage during your, 48-hour Doom marathon that starts when it drops on Friday?
That's a terrible rumor because I don't have time to do anything for 48 hours. My primary goal with the release of Doom is to hopefully include it in our performance testing for the GTX 1080, but I really can't even promise that at this point because of how much other work we're trying to get in time for that release. But I am excited to play it eventually, maybe after GTX 1080 reviews go up. But I saw some demos of it. I know we have the drivers that are released from AMD that you were talking about here, 16.5.2 Radeon Crimson Edition software. It's a beta, certified on Doom. It's not WICL, but whatever. But it does improve Doom performance as well. So they're kind of getting into their promises of same day game drivers. They can't use the Game Ready brand. I guess that's Nvidia's, but same day or day before driver releases for particular game titles. And hopefully that improves the experience for people. Nvidia has had their driver that came out last week, I guess, was their Doom driver as well. So as far as I know, all Radeon and GeForce users should be ready for this. And then the other news was that at the NVIDIA Editors Day, they showed Doom running on a GTX 1080 at 1080p resolution, running on a Vulkan API version. Right? So Vulkan is that new API kind of based off Mantle, part of the Kronos group that is low-level access, all that type of stuff. And there really hasn't been... And let me think and make sure. I don't think there has not been a game release that supports Vulkan yet. The Ashes of the Singularity group said they will be supporting Vulkan, but they haven't integrated that yet. And now Doom says they will have Vulkan support, not on day one, but they say within the first month.
After the launch.
Yeah.
Within the first month, you say?
Yeah, they said within the first month.
Okay.
But I haven't played it yet. I didn't play any of the early access stuff because I was out of town last week. But the gameplay looks impressive. It's very fast. It is kind of, my hope for it is that it kind of gets close to that Quake 3 arena speed in terms of like Twitch gaming and quick turnaround and snaps and running speeds and jumping speeds and all that. And the videos that I have seen of the single player look like it may be getting up to that level too. So as long as they're confident they can keep performance high, because obviously when you're running really fast and you're doing things very quickly, you need that frame rate to be extremely high too. I think in this demo that we're watching that they showed at the NVIDIA Editors Day, with the uncapped frame rate, they're running in like the 140 to 150 frames per second range. Again, this is 1080p and it's on a GTX 1080, so the fastest graphics card that will exist starting next week. But it's still a good sign that they're showing it and demoing it, and it looks fun. It looks fun. I would like to play it tomorrow, but I will probably not.
I suspect you will. I think you could
I might try.
take some time. Go for it, man. You can do it. But just tell your wife I said it was okay. And you'll be living with me. Microsoft updates Windows 10 UWP to support unlocked frame rates and G-Sync FreeSync. I could try to explain this, but I'm just going to step away slowly and let you talk. I mean, this is kind of the unified Windows platform and PC gaming, and the idea, in theory, that all the games will work on all the different versions of Windows. Cue laughter now.
Well, yeah, yes, you should laugh about. This update was it was a Windows update that got pushed out yesterday, I think, the day before. I think it was yesterday. Nope, 2 days ago. Sorry. And if you remember back, I'm sure we've talked about it on the show, back in March, Microsoft's head of Xbox and gaming, Phil Spencer, talked about some of the concerns people had about UWP games, Unified Windows Platform games. If you remember when they first came out, we had Gears of War, we had Forza, Quantum Break more recently. These games showed issues when that you couldn't uncap the frame rates, you could only run in VSync, you could not support G-Sync or FreeSync, variable refresh rate stuff, and you were kind of limited in what the behavior of the game was. So they actually pushed out an update to Windows that enabled the capability to, let me make sure I have the right settings here, open up VSync off options as well as FreeSync and G-Sync. And they promised to have it in May, and they actually hit it in pretty early May, like May 9th or so, which is, hey, that's a positive. So they have now enabled unlocked frame rates and enabled support for FreeSync and G-Sync. The catch is that the games have to be updated to support that as well, right? So, most UWP games didn't even have an option in the settings to unlock the frame rate because it wasn't something that they were ever kind of planning on doing. Feedback from the community said otherwise. Microsoft finally agreed with them and started to enable those features. And as such, games have to be updated to support those features. The new Gears of War Ultimate Edition on Windows 10 got an update yesterday, I believe, that did in fact enable unlocked frame rates. So now I was testing Gears of War and running over 60 frames per second with screen tearing. And, that's like how you benchmark and how competitive gamers want to play. So it actually worked pretty well. And with that increase, or with that improvement, plus a couple of driver updates, Gears of War plays pretty damn well, even on a 980 or a 980 Ti. So that's good. You get some of these. I was talking with Alan earlier, and we talked about in the menu for the game, when you have a fully unlocked frame rate, this happens fairly often with games where the frame rate goes really high because you're not really rendering anything. I think the frame rate in Gears of War with a GTX 1080, world exclusive performance metric here, the menu was 520 frames per second inside Gears of War. And then you start to hear some coil whine and stuff too once you start going at frame rates that high. So to me, I almost kind of laughed as if it were like Microsoft saying, fine, you said you wanted uncapped frame rates? Here you go, 520 frames per second inside the menu. I don't want to hear any more whining and complaining from anybody. It works, it functions, and it is an improvement for the PC gaming version of Gears of War. So hopefully they apply that to Quantum Break. It's another game that definitely needs it, and then we'll be able to include that in our benchmarking suites going forward as well. So it's pretty cool.
Yay, benchmarking.
Yeah.
Got a Twitter question for everybody. At Ryan Fearek tweets, I hope I can pronounce that name correctly, Ryan. At Patrick Norton, which of these low machines, like at Raspberry Pi and others, is worth the investment? So what we're talking about is single board computers. We've been talking a lot about those over the last year or two. And there are a lot of them. There are about a billion of them. The $9 chip computer, which you can find at getchip.com. The Odroid C2 is one I found about recently. That's a big deal for a lot of people because its performance is so much better than the Raspberry Pi 3. That one sells for about $45. If you get it from Ameridroid, which is the U.S. distributor for hardkernel.com. But you're talking about that's a board with roughly, I want to say twice the memory of the Pi 3, a faster processor, and probably much more important for a lot of people. It does not put the Ethernet, gigabit Ethernet is not sharing the same bus as the USB. I think they're all pretty amazing. You know, when you start looking at, you know, there's a stack of them scattered around my office at this point. Some doing different things, some waiting for the next project. But when you start looking at, you know, the Odroid C2, right? It's this little tiny package. You know, and it's very similar in layout to the Raspberry Pi, right? It's got a, you know, I think you can see them in there, the GPIO pins. But this one adds an eMMC. You know, it'll run Linux or Android. They have distros for both that are available. So when you look at something like that for $45, it's probably best used for a headless server. You're not really replacing a desktop yet, but when you're creating appliances, you know, that's one of the other interesting things about the Odroid C2 is it has an IR receiver built into it. There's no Wi-Fi, there's no Bluetooth, but lots of other stuff. I would, you know, the Odroid C2 would be on my list. The Chip $9 PC would be on my list. If you want to use it headless now, if you want to do video projects with it, I would wait for the HDMI adapter to be available because they decided to do kind of a hat for the HDMI adapter. People like BeagleBones, there are so many of them out there. You know, the nice thing about the Raspberry Pi that I think frustrates a lot of people who are, say, fans of the Odroid or some of the other ones is the Raspberry Pi has this huge community and this huge number of accessories and this huge number of distros or projects that have been compiled specifically for that board. But if you start taking a look at, you know, I'm trying to think like there's Qbox, Udo, BeagleBone, CompuLab, QBDruck. The ones I'm the most familiar with is that $9 chip PC, the Odroid C2, and the Raspberry Pi. They all have a lot of potential. You know, try to stick with one. You know, the less familiar you are with Linux or the less you want to learn a lot about Linux, the closer I would stay to the Raspberry Pi. You know, if you want to sort of go in with both feet. I mean, the only downside you can get is if they don't do a particularly good job porting their operating system to the board, you can be in a really frustrating position where nothing will run particularly well on it. But that doesn't seem to be too big of a problem with most of the major boards. But the more obscure they are, probably the harder I'd think about getting involved with that. And understand that when they're new, they tend to be a little flakier than when they've had some time to mature. So hopefully that helps your decision a little bit, Ryan. Not Shrout.
No. Yeah, not me. That's a lot of those types of PCs, though. I mean, clearly this is why this is your foray. You have a lot of more experience with that, but I would not have been able to name anywhere close to that many different designs of that type of stuff. So
at some point, they just became so fascinating to me. You know, it's like, I just turned a USB freaking audio adapter and a $25 board into this amazing audio player that I can access from anywhere in the house. So that's the Odroid C2 you're looking at right now. That one's really interesting because of it's got the ability to drop eMMC boards on there, which are essentially should be faster than micro SD cards. I don't know. I'm fascinated by these. I'm frustrated by these. You know, the more time you have to experiment with a project, the more likely you are to be successful if you're not doing something where there's like, you know, you are downloading, you know, well, yeah, Volumio, for example, which is the dedicated audio version, or one of the dedicated set-top box operating systems. That, however, is a conversation for another day. Oh, my goodness. We should take a moment to thank our sponsors over at Braintree. By next year, maybe even next week, there could be a whole new way to pay for things. Yeah, you just got your website finished. Everything's working smooth. And then suddenly somebody up in the executive branch says, we got to be able to take Fitzweasels. What? Don't worry, man. Doesn't matter if it's the next Bitcoin or the next Apple Pay or both. Braintree has your back. Braintree's full-stack payment platform is easily adaptable to whatever the future holds, so you can adapt easily too. Braintree's got it. Fitzweasels, it's there, man. Accept everything right now, by the way. Accept everything from pounds to PayPal to that next big innovation from any device with just one integration. And when that new payment method comes out, all you have to do is update a few lines of code. Seriously, like 10 lines of code total for Braintree integration. No late nights, no complicated recoding, no stress about staying ahead of the curve. Braintree Payments is here to help. Simple, secure payments code you can integrate quickly. Braintree's code is set and good to go for Android, iOS, and JavaScript. SDKs in 7 languages: .NET, Node.js, Java, Perl, PHP, Python, Ruby. And I am told by people that can read code without getting confused, it is elegant code with clear documentation. Braintree, people, gives you an easy way to accept multiple payment types with one integration. Integrating it into your app is as easy as inserting a few lines of code. Do yourself a favor and learn more at braintreepayments.com/twitch. And we want to thank them for their support of This Week in Computer Hardware. Oh, goodness. Kaby Lake leaks are disappointing. That just sounds mean, man. What was going on with Scott when he typed that one?
Well, I don't think... I think that might actually have been my editorializing, not Scott's. But some Kaby Lake benchmarks did leak out, or apparent benchmarks did leak out. This is it's being called the Core i7 7700K, a clear succession of the Core i7 6700K. It is a SciSoft benchmark result, and it is not significantly faster than the other parts. So Kaby Lake, for those who don't know, is not a tick or a talk. Intel's kind of gone away from that. This is a same process node, same architecture that we have with Skylake, but slightly tweaked, right? So we would have expected after Skylake to see a new architecture come out. And now this time we're seeing a new, I'm sorry, we should have seen a new process node come out. Now we're seeing like a new architecture, but it's kind of a modest increase. Now, take one SciSoft benchmark result for whatever it's worth, which is honestly not a whole lot. But it does kind of list some specs. It's apparently a quad-core processor that has a 3.6 gigahertz base clock and a 4.2 gigahertz turbo clock, 8 megs of cache, 24 compute unit graphics processor. Now, what's interesting about that is that the Core i7 6700K that is currently available Skylake for enthusiasts and consumers has the same 4.2 gigahertz turbo clock, but has a 4.0 gigahertz base clock. So this Kaby Lake processor actually has a 400 megahertz slower base clock, although it will turbo up to the same speed. So now we don't know what the TDPs are, and so it may be that maybe this Kaby Lake part is significantly lower power or something, but I don't expect that to be the case. So it's a little bit disappointing, both in terms of the benchmark results don't show anything kind of impressive, and then the specifications we got from it show that it's not pushing boundaries further than anybody, well, as far as anybody wanted or hoped with the new generation stuff.
Generally, you're disappointed.
Yeah, I am. Yeah. And hence the title of the line item in the show notes.
Well, I mean, are we basically talking about the we were expecting a slowdown in Intel production because of them moving away from TikTok, where they've been laying the groundwork for the slowdown. The Moore's law no longer being a law of nature anymore, and more of a ideal time in computer processing. Development that turned out to last a little less long than we thought, 30, 40 years, which is a long time in technology. But, is this it? Is it just incremental improvements at this point? It's flagging along a few percent here, a few percent there. We're 20% faster in 3 years.
It kind of feels that way. And I mean, to be honest, we've been in that for a little bit as it is. If you look back from Sandy Bridge to Ivy to Broadwell or from Haswell to Broadwell to Skylake, that from Haswell to Broadwell to Skylake, you're talking about 5 to 10% at any given point, and some of that is in instructions per clock, and some of that is in improved frequency or the ability to spike up higher, faster, more instantaneously. But it may slow down a little bit more from that, right? It's. Right. we'll see what Intel can do more on the kind of ultra enthusiast side relatively quickly, right? I mean, we all know Broadwell E is coming out sooner rather than later, and we'll see how it kind of changes things. But it's obviously going to be a much more expensive part than what the Kaby Lake benchmarks show.
Everyone needs a motherboard with more LEDs on it. Would you believe it's coming from ASUS? Republic of Gamers Strix X99 gaming motherboard for Intel Core i7 X series. Nope, it's not dead yet. You may have completely forgotten about the X99 powered machines, those super expensive ones that came out before the Skylake desktops. Quote, ROG Strix is taking on a brand new look, and the time has come to debut the first motherboard in the ROG Strix series. ROG Strix X99 Gaming is a new ATX motherboard based on the Intel X99 chipset, retrofitted with exclusive technologies to maximize the potential of the Intel Core i7 X series processor for socket LGA 2011 V3. I love ASUS motherboards. They are stable. They are well supported. They do a lot of nice work. You get a ton of additional software in there that actually is available when you get your hands on the board and actually functions. Did I mention they're nice and they work? There was a lot of buzzwords to actual content ratio in that paragraph. Getting to the fun part, there's Supreme FX Audio, which is essentially their work to get super clean, super tight, powerful audio, and Intel NIC 2x2 band dual Wi-Fi with multi-user MIMO support, SATA Express M2 and U.2 storage support, which is a big deal because I've seen a few motherboards that had one but not the other. Thunderbolt 3, a reinforced PCI Express slot for heavier GPUs, which is nice, especially if you're the kind of person that shoves your GPUs in like you're trying to push them all the way through the desk. But, ladies and gentlemen, Sebastian writes, the feature that will be hardest to miss with the Strix X99 gaming motherboard has to be the customizable RGB lighting. So now, finally, I think you can just about get your Corsair K70 RGB rapid-fire keyboard to match your case. Possibly not in real time, but you have all of the colors on a 4-pin RGB strip right there on the motherboard. Backlighting, all sorts of things, casting a soft glow inside of your case. The little clips. I don't know if we can drill down, you can kind of see how the little clips, little plastic clips at the end of the PCI Express slot will change colors as you change the colors of the LEDs. I expect that's going to be an incredibly expensive motherboard.
It's pretty likely. For some reason, I adore the idea of those little clips being illuminated. Now, Alan pointed out last night that every time you put a graphics card in one, you are covering it to some degree, which is true.
But you're now underlighting your graphics card with a little bit of LED there. Now ASUS is going to have to release a whole series of ROG GPUs with white enclosures to better reflect the light from the X99 ROG Strix motherboard. This is genius. They're going to sell dozens of these. No, I mean, it's snarking about LED. I'm with you. That level of detail is always kind of charming to see. Like, oh, what else can we light up? These. And two, though, they make nice motherboards. They do a really good job. They're not the cheapest motherboards out there, but they have a funny habit of not dying and functioning out of the box, which are two of my favorite things with motherboards.
Yeah.
Just thinking. Yeah. Oh, my goodness. Whenever we talk about routers, somebody out there tells us to check out one of Ubiquiti's programmable routers on Tech Thing. And Ubiquiti, if you're not familiar with them, if you're doing long-distance Wi-Fi, it's not about cantennas anymore. It's like, go to Ubiquiti. They've got it sorted out. They do these really cool... basically all sorts of, their whole Unify series, which essentially it's kind of like antennas or routers or base stations that are all integrated into one simple tool, the nanobeam ones. They're just really cool. Like if you need to connect two distant things before you start hacking things together, do yourself a favor and take a look at what's available at at Ubiquiti. But what's interesting is they are dropping the AmpliFi 802.11 AC Wi-Fi router series, which comes with 2 prepared range extenders, which basically around the same time we're seeing some of the other major manufacturers of home routers start to release what they consider business class roaming, right? In some cases, it is impossible to get your house wired up in a way that a single router will cover your entire house. Maybe your house is in a U shape, multiple levels, issues with walls and stuff. The idea of having kind of business class roaming where you can go from access point to access point without having to log out or log in or without having things fail is a pretty cool concept. So Ubiquiti's version of that is going to be the AmpliFi. It's going to be $199, 802.11 AC router, again with 2 additional, the idea is that they're going to offer 2 prepared range extenders on that, which is, I kind of like the idea. The range extenders are 802.11n, plugged directly into electrical sockets. If you scroll down a little bit, you can see those. And Linksys is going to be doing something similar later this month that will be available, where they're doing the AC5400 tri-band multi-user MIMO router, the EA9500, and the RE7000 range extender, both of which are going to offer roaming, again, what they call room-to-room Wi-Fi or seamless roaming. So that's a good thing, and I'll be interested in seeing how these perform in the wild, and how well they do. It's good. Ubiquiti's been making some nice products. I'll be very curious to see what happens, especially with their higher end products. They're doing like a $350 AmpliFi HD router, which has like some crazy transmit power. But and those are available now, by the way. You can order those now. So pretty cool. So if you're having issues with coverage, there are options, people. There are more options. And in case you're wondering when Google's going to have their answer to Amazon's Echo, apparently it's going to be Chirp. That's what Recode is writing. Mark Bergen says the product team at Google is working on a hardware device that would integrate Google's search and voice assistant technology akin to the Amazon Echo. So it's basically going to be an on-hub, but not an on-hub. They're calling it Chirp. And just what you need. Okay, Google, what's the temperature in Saskatchewan? Okay, Google, who's the current world champion curling team? Okay, Google, can I order something from Amazon? No? Please? No? So
I think for me, I love what the Amazon Echo does, but I'm much more ingrained in the Google ecosystem in terms of email and calendars and documents and all that type of stuff. So I feel like that could be a much better product for me, at least. Maybe not for everybody, but for me, because I don't want to use the Echo to like order things necessarily. I don't necessarily need the idea of like reordering toilet paper or food.
Alexa, I need more diapers. Stat.
Hey, don't get me wrong, that does sound pretty awesome, but I just don't. For me, it seems like if the Amazon Echo had access to all of my like Google services and all that type of stuff kind of easily and automatically, maybe that would just kind of scratch the itch. But I feel like Google does a good job with what they have on their phone. Even though I have an iPhone, I still use Google Now instead of Siri for everything. So I'd be willing to try it out. I'd be willing to give it a shot, but I do that for most things too. So
I'll try anything once. I'm Ryan Shrout. Actually, who am I saying? I'm Patrick Norton, and I've tried almost everything once. I'll be curious. I'll be curious to see what people actually do with it. It's been interesting for Shannon, my co-host on Tech Thing, is obsessed with her Alexa, and which is really funny to me because she's somebody who's very, privacy and security oriented, and she has this box sitting in her house listening 24/7. which is kind of funny to me. Yeah, I'll be curious to see. What I want to see one is that is integrated with like Logitech's Harmony remote, or an actual functioning whole house Internet of Things system where I could be like, okay, Google, close the blinds in the living room by 50%. Okay, Google, open the blinds in the living room. Okay, Google, start, Game of Thrones, and have everything function the way it does with like a Harmony remote, but be actually talking to it.
Yeah.
Let's go check to make sure Logitech hasn't done that, and I just missed it.
Good point.
At EV8 tweets at Patrick Norton, you made a video 7 years ago about car batteries and UPSs. Do you have any thoughts on it for current day use? Yeah. Don't do it in a place you rent. Charging car batteries inside your house either works perfectly well or you blow things up. I prefer UPSs that are warranted by the UPS manufacturer, which may make me a wimp. I've also had friends that build massive car battery powered UPS systems that they were running in their garages for years, basically by hacking uninterruptible power supplies. The primary thing you need to watch out for is if you put a car battery, which has a tremendous amount of storage and amperage compared to the little alarm battery that came inside of your typical uninterruptible power supply, you run the risk of, damaging or burning out or setting on fire the charger inside that came inside the uninterruptible power supply, or not actually having a battery that's properly charged, or doing something weird, with having an excess of amperage draw in there. So be careful. I get why people do it. I'm not a particularly big fan, but I've also seen people do a lot of profoundly dangerous and questionable things with car batteries inside of houses. So that may make me more cautious than I need to be. At Ryan Shrout writes, at James Gaunt, how can I transmit HDMI over Cat6 network, including switches, not direct connections to mini TVs?
I put a link in underneath the link to the tweet to a product on Monoprice. We actually did this originally when we moved into the office, and it was a really good idea that didn't quite pan out for a couple of other reasons. We actually had a big like 48 port switch, and I wanted and I ran Cat6 all over the office, and I wanted it. I put like bundles of 4, and I said, well, this could either be a bunch of network connections or it could be 2 HDMI connections. It depends on how we set up the office. And this little adapter comes with a sender and a receiver unit. It takes 2 Cat5 or Cat6 cables. They recommend Cat6 cables to run a full HDMI connection. Now, it says right now it only supports up to 1080p, and it does do HDCP encryption across it. So like it will play encrypted content for you. And we actually did this for a while for like getting our cameras over into different parts of the office, because for me, running Cat5 cable was easier than running SDI cable or buying HDMI cables. It's significantly less expensive, even when you're running them in pairs. And it did work pretty well. And that was probably 4 years ago. So I assume these devices are probably a little bit better at this point. And he does switches, and he did do that as well.
I'm sorry. I was gonna say it's been a mature technology for years now. If you search around on Monoprice, they've got a 1x4 HDMI amplifier and splitter. Which will basically, you can put 1 line in and 4 lines out, basically so that you have multiple displays that are all displaying the same thing on that. That's one of the least expensive versions I've seen. That's $122 off of Monoprice. Buy decent HDMI cables. They're saying you can extend them up to 164 feet, which is pretty distant. But yeah, Ethernet splitters for running HDMI are pretty amazing and getting cheaper all the time. Probably not a lot cheaper than what Monoprice has them for, but it's an option. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, PCPer.com is a place to find Ryan Shrout. If you haven't been there, do yourself a favor, go to the PCPer.com/leaderboard. And also check out, ladies and gentlemen, like we mentioned a week or two ago, Mr. Malventano is working on some new and exciting benchmarks for hard drives and SSDs, which I think are worth checking out. So you can find me at TechThing, or if you want to talk about home theater, avexcel.com. That's the podcast I do with Robert Heron. We talk about home theaters and screens a lot. Shocking, I know. And we want to thank you for listening to this episode of TWiCH, This Week in Computer Hardware. You can find all of our episodes at twit.tv/TWiCH. And you can follow us at Ryan Shrout or at Patrick Norton on the @Twitter. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Patrick Norton.
I'm Ryan Shrout.
We'll see you next week on TWiCH.